Okay, so welcome to this afternoon seminar. Welcome to anyone who's remote and today we're very pleased to have Jana de Wiljes. She's from Potsdam, and she's going to talk about fast moving tempo ensemble transform filter. The Bayesian elliptical.
Thank you so much for having me. Actually, we talked a little bit, the title is a little bit misleading because I'm going to talk about many things and also at some point about this. So I'm fortunate enough to be in both programs. And I think with this program, I'm a little bit new to the topic. This talk is really about me trying to put a connection to what I'm typically working on to what I think this program is about. So hopefully I'm got it right in terms of what I think the program is about. And yeah, so I will talk a little bit also about what's more my business, everyday business. And yeah, I definitely have been kind of looking more towards the type of English problems you guys are considering in the program as well. But yeah, as I said, I'm fairly new to it. So let's just jump right in it. And since I'm not sure if I'm boring you or if it's getting too complicated, please interrupt me at any point because it's just my attempt to kind of find a common language, I guess. So really quickly, so I would say most of the time what I do is data assimilation. And the typical go-to example is numerical weather prediction because they kind of have really high-dimensional systems, like state spaces up to 10 to the power of 8. And you have fairly complicated models, and you have continuously data is coming in, actually coming in this quickly, but very quickly nowadays that people are even considering it in a continuous manner. And obviously, this is when we develop algorithms, often the application in mind. But of course, there are many other things that this kind of setup where you have a model and some kind of data, and you want to have some algorithms to reduce uncertainty in the predictions of the state. Yeah, this is important in many applications. And I just want to quickly tell you about two of them that I've been personally also working on and continuing working on, just to give you another application that is not standard weather prediction. One project we're currently working on is space weather. Despite also having the term weather, it's model-wise obviously very different equations. And what you're really trying to understand or predict is the phase space density, the linear space areas. Basically, we want to understand the electrons that are kind of around in belts around the Earth. We want to understand them a little bit better because they're differently charged depending on the sun behavior, and if there are big solar storms coming. This can actually highly affect also satellites and even electronics on Earth. And depending on what belts you're looking at, there's also different models. What we're currently looking at is radiation belts and ring currents. And yeah, this has it's far from where numerical weather prediction on Earth is, but we're really trying to get there to bring it to that same level because yeah, it's very important for satellites, and nowadays we all need satellites to survive to use our phones and everything. And I think the beginning of last year, Elon Musk lost like 40 satellites worth millions and millions of dollars due to a solar storm. So it is worthwhile to predict this. Here's enough money. Yeah, other people have satellites too. So yeah, this is definitely one of the application areas. So I'm not going to dive much deeper into it right now, but if you're interested, come and talk to me. And the other problem I wanted to quickly mention, I've been working on, and we kind of treated this also in a non-stationary fashion, looking at asteroids, and we essentially want to predict the surface temperature which is again affected by the sun. So it changes depending on where the asteroid is with respect to the sun, or which way it's turned around. So it's changing in time. And what you're really interested in is actually not the surface temperature. What you really care about is what the asteroid is made of. So you're really actually interested in the parameters. The way we treat it is you can have very simple models to actually much more complicated ones. So the one we want is kind of the boring one. But we also have more complicated ones where you can essentially trying to estimate the surface and the properties of the asteroid. And this you can then look at as more of a classical inverse problem. Or you can also kind of estimate the state, which is now the surface temperature, and then from that we could do parameter estimation or simultaneous state and parameter estimation. These type of problems, we're kind of looking at. But let's get to the mathematical setup that could be anything, like in terms of application, anything. So I'm assuming here my model is that kind of type of equation. Of course, this could be an ODE or PDE, but I'm just right now assuming that I already have a discretized version here. And then I also have the data coming in discretely. And if I ever get to it at the very end of my talk, I will also be considering a continuous setup. But traditionally, for example, American Red prediction, we would have this kind of setup. And the noise could be coming from uncertainties, first of all, in the initial conditions, or because we make a lot of errors already doing the numerical discretization. And what are we really interested in the filtering setup? We kind of want to estimate the probability of the signal, of the state, for example, the weather condition on all the data we have seen so far. So that's the ultimate goal. And of course, this can be quite hard. So there's many approximation steps that you might want to take in between. And just I'm not sure how familiar you with these types of filters. Just really quickly, the go-to filter for a linear setup would be the so-called Kalman filter. It was already developed in the 60s. Actually, first application was for moon landing, and NASA used it heavily to correct the course. The underlying idea here, though, is that you actually have a linear model and also a linear observation operator. And then everything becomes quite clear because the filtering distribution is then just a Gaussian. And all you need to do is estimate the first two moments, the mean and the covariance. And there are formulas for this. So here A is supposed to be just the model. And so you estimate the first moment and the second moment in two steps. First you kind of forecast, and then you let the information of the data come in. This is CFD's update formulas. And this case here is for the so-called Kalman game. So essentially you're updating from one Gaussian to another. And probably the years, no. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Sorry. Actually, I already apologize. The notation is going to be horrible because that's only the start. But bear with me. At least it seems like you're still picking up on my errors. So you're still with me. That's just the general setup. But of course, we will not get away with this because typically the models are non-linear. And from that, what you can do, even if you're still in the linear setting, but also actually when you're in the nonlinear setting, you could say, let's do this whole thing empirically. So you don't want to immediately estimate the mean, the covariance, but you just generate a few samples of the whole ensemble. And then from that, you could estimate the empirical covariance. So here, all the ensemble members, you propagate basically the same way you already propagate the the mean before. What I didn't do here, which is not correct because I didn't want to make it overly complicated. You actually also put noise here on the individual observations. This is called perturbed observation. What you're really perturbing is actually this here, because otherwise you're not ending up with the right covariance at the end. But yeah, this is just I wanted to keep it more simple here. But anyway, so yeah, the idea is just to empirically estimate the so you have a Monte Carlo approximation of this Gaussian. And what the nice thing about this is that you can still do this in the nonlinear case because you can here you can forward fully with the fully nonlinear system. This you can actually also do with the mean. This is not a problem, but what you can't do is you can't nonlinearly propagate the covariance. And here, because you're now empirically estimating it, and here you already forwarded in a nonlinear fashion, we kind of already captured, despite this Gaussian assumption, we're kind of capturing some of the nonlinearities. And this is actually still to this day one of the go-to filters. The German DWD, so our Met office, is running a version of an ensemble Kalman filter. Actually, in LTTF, we get to like a more closed one of those filters that they are using in a couple of slides ahead. Yeah, it's still very hard to beat. And basically, one of the goals in data assimilation is coming up with filters that you can somehow afford that are stable enough, but are going beyond this Gaussian approximation. But that's basically the ultimate goal that everybody is trying to reach right now. And yeah, finding the balance between entering computational complexities that you cannot afford, and also actually usually you lose a lot of stability when you go away from this. So this is still the gold standard. And for example, we have been like using it for the space weather as well, trying to estimate the phase space density, and has been working reasonably well. And actually, in these kind of models, they use basically like the highly nonlinear the parameters, but in the states they're actually quite linear. That's why it's working quite well as well. As soon as you go to the parameters and do simultaneous state and parameters, the estimation becomes a little bit more complicated. But let's talk more about this nonlinear case. So ideally what you would want to do is you could say, okay, this whole Monte Carlo thing we could of course do in general. We could say, okay, let's just approximate the filtering distribution with samples. And in theory, the theory for that is out there. You could just use, for example, sequential Monte Carlo, where you would calculate here, these are importance rates, and you just basically generate a lot of samples with the forecast, with the evolution model, and then you weight it with the likelihood. So this is coming here and here in the weights, and then you're done. But the thing is, first of all, calculating the forward model is super expensive. For example, in numerical weather predictions, you can typically only compute 200 ensemble members. So this is already a lot. This is what they're currently, 100 to 200 is currently what they're using, for example, at the German Met office. So for that state space, like even if you could generate much more for the state space 10 to the power of 8, that's just ridiculous. You kind of you can't get away with like sequential Monte Carlo. And the reason is because essentially if you have very few samples, the weights will all be very small at some point because they're too far away from the actual observation. And then you would really have to cover basically the whole space well to always have samples that have a fairly high weight that is non-zero essentially. And this degeneracy is obviously a problem in all kinds of Monte Carlo methods. And of course, people have been trying to kind of work on this issue to get away, because there is this limit of not being able to generate more particles, or you can only marginally improve on that number. But so people have been looking into what can they do to improve on that. And now I want to enter, so this was more like, yeah, the data assimilation introduction. Now I'm heading towards the part where I come more to the classical inverse problems, and how the methods we're using in data assimilation can also be used in that subject. So let's say we have a problem such as that. So more of a classical inverse problem. We have a parameter that we want to estimate, some kind of function u. And of course, we can also like use a Bayesian ansatz here. We might have some kind of prior assumptions for u. And of course, we can also calculate the likelihood. And then we want to estimate what the posterior is. And obviously, you could use classical Monte Carlo techniques for this. But because I kind of want to use the data assimilation techniques, what I want to do is I want to temper. This is not only smart because I want to use data assimilation techniques, but it's often if you start off with the prior quite far away from the posterior, it's actually better to kind of smoothly go towards your posterior in smaller steps than trying to do this like a big move at once.
Sorry, do you have data assimilation?
Basically, that's a very philosophical question.
Okay, I think I've heard it in weather forecasting, but does it mean something more familiar with this problem?
I would say it's just Bayesian inference that has like there's a dynamic, so you have non-stationary components. So and you want to do it typically sequentially, but this is also not true because people do data assimilation variation as well.
Is it just what weather forecasters call Bayesian inverse functions?
I would say
Yeah.
and say
It's pretty general.
it's like that's complex for
Computation.
yeah, the question about saying people about like that.
Yeah. But yeah, I would just say, yeah, the important part I think is that you have a time evolution. I think that's the important part. And I personally, when I only do this sequentially, so I'm not talking about any variation approaches, which is, so you have two branches, you have the sequential approaches and variational ones. And I guess actually, yeah, variational ones, would be even more closely integrated to the more classical inverse problems and such. But yeah, the idea would just be to say, okay, since I don't actually have a time evolution, I can create time artificially through splitting the likelihood. And yeah, as I said, I'm not just doing it because I want to definitely use these techniques, but also because it might lead to better results as I'm doing basically smaller steps towards the posterior rather than going in one big step. That might be too far away and that might be complicated, make things much more complicated. And but essentially what I end up with is I have these intermediate densities. In fact, it's not really clear if they're actually densities or just measures, but let's assume everything is pretty, we actually have intermediate densities here. And they're just they're proportional to the likelihood to the power of whatever the increments here are, going up to 1 in our tempering schedule. And yeah, what I'm obviously my first measure is obviously my prior, and then hopefully at the end I'm ending up with my triplets here. So with that ansatz in mind, I can now apply the methods I've been using or I've been proposing, and now for data assimilation, we can now use them for the classical inverse. Just one example. So I've been just talking about sequential Monte Carlo. So what we can do is now temperate sequential Monte Carlo. So let's assume our likelihood looks like this. Obviously, I'm ignoring the normalization constant. And then what I can do is I can calculate here I can still use this empirical ansatz, but what I do now is I'm calculating the weights in between weights, and this K stands for the intermediate density, basically the one down here. So this is how I calculate the weights, and then if I continue to do that till the end of the schedule, then I also end up with the true posterior should I be able to generate enough samples. And of course, I still need to do things that I would be doing in sequential Monte Carlo anyway. So typically what we do is resample, because multiplying up very small weights is typically leading to even faster degeneracy. So what we do is to resample in every step and get new samples that are distributed according to the weights. Yeah.
When you do this, excluding the likelihood of that, this may kind of you're actually taking the power of
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, so it seems like there might be other ways to kind of reproduce it. Why is it not like this?
I mean, I guess because it's very straightforward, very easy. Immediately you have this first Bayesian step, and you basically multiply it up again and you get the same problem again. So I guess you could also be saying I just take into the data individually, take the data into account. I guess you could do that as well. So in some sense you could do that, I'm sure, but this way we immediately see, because in that sense you already see all of the data, and what we really do is actually we assume that it's more noisy. So because we kind of have to, what the power really does is you put more uncertainty on each of the observation, like each time you see, because you see the observation several times, so you put more uncertainty on it. So yeah, I guess you could also take the data into that. You could have a whole bunch of samples. You could also say you take them into account individually. Yeah, I mean, I guess what we would have then is we would have individually posteriors conditioned always on that data point you would have seen. And then yeah, and take the reply. Well, I mean, I guess you could then also, I think now it's kind of like a street. Now you have also this, really, you can think of it as time in that sense. You could really, and also the way you evolve now is, I don't know what's actually better, but now you already see the whole of the data, and you're continuously improving because you've seeing it several times essentially. I mean, you're going towards a whole bunch of data. Maybe if you see just pick individual data points, maybe that could also be misleading, and you impose a bias because maybe some of the data is worse than other. So if you already see the whole bunch of the data, you know what I mean? Yeah, so you can do this, and of course, and this is, I guess, generally true, that you want to choose your prior somehow in a smart way. And now what you also need to do is, because I now kind of, because I introduced this this artificial time, and through that I can now do the update several times, but I also kind of want to evolve now in each step. I kind of want to do the evolution model part. So I want to propose each time the next kind of sample. This is a crucial point, because I somehow need to get away from where I'm currently at, in the hopes that I'm going in the right direction towards the data, for example. And yeah, there's many things you could try to do to kind of help put proposal densities in terms of the prior. But yeah, one thing you can do using Gaussian kind of densities, you could do something like preconditioning from frequency. And yeah, I think Colin was here last week. People Colin Potter have been working a lot on this kind of stuff. But I guess choosing a good prior is like very essential in the classical inverse problems as well. So yeah, this is still a problem. If you start off very badly and not moving anywhere sensible, this is still a problem also with these kind of methods. So you definitely still have to do that. And now, because if I'm in a super high dimensional setting, the sequential Monte Carlo, the template sequential Monte Carlo is also not going to be magical. It's the same as the Monte Carlo. It will suffer from the curse of dimensionality. In my experience, just the few, this is very small sample size in terms of what I've experienced. I do think in some sense it seems to work a little bit like you need less samples than running a classical Monte Carlo scheme on the traditional inverse problem. But this is just my personal experience and various kind of numeric examples. So not really anything that's more than my personal experience. Okay. Now, of course, what you can do if you're in a super high dimensional setting, maybe you don't want to actually do sequential Monte Carlo, you want to have some kind of Gaussian approximation. And of course, you can do that. So it's the same kind of idea as the ensemble Kalman filter. What you now do is you kind of have this Gaussian approximation coming in. But at the same time, you still want to keep your, obviously your G is still non-linear. So you kind of want to keep that evolution, or here it's actually more like the observation operator, non-linear. And here it's exactly what we had earlier in the ensemble Kalman filter, just for this inverse problem, tempered inverse problem setup. So what you do is now you evolve kind of the current approximation of the U, and basically what is considered the evolution with the model is then kind of some kind of preconditioner that generates this from the last posterior samples from wherever you're up in the schedule. And then, yeah, you basically do this ensemble Kalman step. Again, I'm kind of omitting the fact here that I actually have to also put noise here in the data. This is crucial. I have been kind of lazy in the slides here, so don't do it without. Yeah, exactly. So this is just the Kalman game here. And what you have to do is, because here what is actually happening is G is kind of the observation operator. So the typical the Kalman game would be the covariance and the H, and then in the brackets here to the power of the inverse is typically the R, which is now, as you can see here, is through having this tempering, you basically increase the noise. And then you also, here, this is actually a combination of the H and the covariance here, which makes it look a little bit different from the typical Kalman game, but that's exactly the Kalman game you get. And so you can do the ensemble Kalman filter also for the inverse problem. And of course, again, this is much more stable if you have a high dimensional kind of high dimensional cycle. So what I hope I kind of convey to you now is that anything I'm coming up in my data assimilation world, I could potentially also apply to an classical inverse problem. Okay, and now I'm going back to my data assimilation world and trying to convince you that we have some fancy filters that potentially then could hopefully also be again useful in the English problem world. I'm doing just to make things more complicated. I don't know why I should have actually put this out, but I wanted to be more general. What you can also do is you might, especially for some kind of models, what you might have is actually kind of memory in your model. And then it would be good not to just update the current state with the data up to now, but also go a little bit further back and update either the whole time interval up to this point, or maybe just till you actually kind of, whatever you assume how long your memory is in your model, which is usually at some point it goes down. So it's often okay to say, oh, I'm just updating like a time window at any given point in time. This part, I guess, is not very relevant for the English problems, but relevant in the data simulation. For now, all it means here is that my notation becomes even more annoying. Because what I have now is I basically always store my history of length L, and always update that as well with whatever my update currently is. I always update up to like this moving window of length L. I always update this as well. What you can do is, if you just want to think about all of this just in terms of filtering, is assume a capital L to be 1, and then it's the whole, like then it's the same as we have. This is kind of nice because what is nice about the filters is that we can often immediately kind of turn them into a smoother at this time. For some stuff, it's a little bit more tricky. And that we'll get to that, and that's why it's kind of interesting now to think about this kind of smoothing problem. All this slide actually does is introduce my horrible notation with that you have the history here, got paid till the end of the time interval. But other than that, the formulas are exactly the same as earlier when we had the ensemble common project. And as I said, if you just want to, I think I also kind of use smoother and filter at this point interchangeably, so don't get alarmed by this as well. So what I'm now trying to do is, which might feel like a pain in the beginning, but then actually is quite useful, is now I want to show you a few different types of filters. And then what we want to get to is what was in my title, the hybrid path. So because I could now introduce a whole range of filters, but ultimately what I will do is I can not only split the likelihood for this whole tempering thing, I can also split it in terms of saying, oh, I want to mix 2 different filters. And the whole goal of this is actually, because I might have a Gaussian approximate filter, which is very stable and gets me in the right direction I want to get to. But then I want to maybe throw onto the whole thing also a much more fancy filter, like some kind of approximative sequential Monte Carlo filter. So it will not be like a true sequential Monte Carlo filter, but some kind of approximation I was talking earlier about, where everybody's kind of trying to go beyond the Gaussian assumption. And if you want to think about it as a better proposal densities for a sequential Monte Carlo thing, or hybrid in terms of mixing different filters, typically what we've experienced numerically is that they of course have a real advantage because they go beyond the Gaussian, but still they often carry, if you combine it with the Gaussian kind of approximately filter, they still carry this robustness of the Bayesian filter. And this is where I'm heading at, just for you to know why I'm introducing all kinds of weird filters to you. So bear with me if you at some point like, okay, get another filter, great. I'm trying to pinpoint where the crucial points are. So the first thing to realize about this is, again, ignore the big long thing. This is basically my prior ensemble and my posterior ensemble. And what I have is my update is essentially just a linear transformation in my ensemble. And now I want to build filters that have very similar kind of linear transformation, but in some sense going beyond this Gaussian approximation. And then since it's just a linear transformation, I can of course just combine them. It's just matrix multiplication. And this is why I'm now kind of emphasizing that I have this kind of structure. And now I'm introducing several filters that have this structure, but are different in nature somehow. Okay? First filter. It's actually just an ensemble tomography filter, but this is the one people typically use opposed to the one I introduced earlier. So what's messy and I've kind of omitted was always is perturbing the observation, what you typically need to do, and generating this random noise is causing often a lot of trouble. And we don't want to do it in the big systems. So what people did was they came up with this filter. The name ensemble square root filter comes from this square root matrix here. And you don't need to understand all the details, but the crucial part about it is that it has this structure. In the end, it's just a linear transformation. And what it does is, if everything were Gaussian, then for finite ensemble numbers, this filter, so if everything was linear in my system, so linear observation of the area and linear model, this filter will give you the true mean that the Kalman filter would produce and true covariance, even for finite ensemble numbers. And that's basically the whole idea how you get this complicated equation. So what you do is in the linear system, you know what the mean, the covariance have to be for the Kalman filter. There's formulas for this. And then you just build this filter in a way that the empirical mean for any finite m matches that. That's exactly how you get to that. And this is typically, at least some version of it, is a filter that would be used in, for example, on the German networks. They're also called LETTFs. There's many, we love acronyms in our community, and many complicated acronyms, but yeah, essentially that's the whole idea behind all of these filters. Okay, which makes them kind of nice because at least in the linear case, even though you do this ensemble approximation, you end up with a true linear covariance, which is quite nice because typically you only achieve that in ensemble. Okay.
Sorry, is that what's
the not necessarily you have to do magic to make it always nice. We're actually not going to get to that, but a lot of work goes into to make this linearity somehow stable. But yeah. So another filter, just going to quickly, as I told you, flash filters at you, but just to give you the idea, because we will later on do this as well for other filters. So the idea of the ensemble square filter was moment matching. Let's match the moment of the first two moments of the Kalman filter. And now people were like, great idea. How about we match the first two moments of the particle filter? Obviously, in the particle filter, you don't assume necessarily that you have a Gaussian, but you can compute the weights and can just compute the first two moments, the empirical covariance and the empirical mean. And you can build your filter in such a way that it matches those. And this is exactly how this filter or smoother is derived. And then, so in some sense, the idea here is to say, maybe we're going then already a little bit beyond these Gaussian assumptions because we're matching the moments of the particle filter, which might be a little bit more accurate than the ones of the Kalman filter in the nonlinear set. And now we get to the really fancy stuff. What you can also do, and I'm not going to do, I'm going to run over this fast because I'm slow, but a lot of the filters that are trying to get beyond this Gaussian assumption nowadays are essentially trying to estimate, for example, a transport map that gets you from the prior ensemble to a posterior ensemble. And if you have not done that at all before, just know that in theory that would produce even in the nonlinear case the true posterior if you could estimate this transport map. And this is the whole idea behind this. You can think of it also as a resampling step. Because what you can do is, if you could say, so we're computing these importance weights anyway, and what you typically then do is you don't actually multiply your ensemble with it, you just resample according to the importance weights. That's what you would do also in the sequential unified step. And this is, of course, resampling is done, and you randomly generate this, but you could say, oh, let's do this deterministically through a matrix. Kind of just assume that there's a Markov chain underlying this resampling step, and you compute the associated Markov, the transition matrix, and it has to fulfill certain properties. And now we want to kind of estimate that. And one way to do this is to say, okay, essentially what you do is the posterior ensemble members, this is one of them, essentially then the average, the expected value of the random variable that is associated with one of the columns of the matrix. This detail is not important, but yeah, this is what's happening. And you could, if you just think of monomial resampling, what you could do is just put the weights in the columns, and that what you would get is then here basically to each of the ensemble members, you would get the average of the random variable that is associated with these probabilities coming from the weights. The problem is this is actually kind of creating something where your prior ensemble has nothing to do with your posterior ensemble. They're literally independent. What you would want to have is that they are highly correlated, because you assume, and this is, I guess, the general idea that is not coming from the data estimation community, and you are actually quite sure your model is pretty good. You know that there are a lot of issues, but generally you trust the model. So you want whatever the model suggests, you do think it should be somehow correlated with where you're trying to get to. I guess that's not so much in the English problem community, but this is the underlying idea where
I'm just going whether it's something quite unstable.
in a way, but you do trust it without the model. I mean, nowadays, I guess there are people who are trying to do now casting, we basically completely rely on the data. But back in the day, the model was everything, and the data is just
a model, but the data is very uncertain.
The data is very sparse. Yeah, I think that's the general issue. Nowadays, data is coming in much more frequently, and actually, what they do, even at the German Met Office, is when they want to predict the weather in Germany, they tell somebody to look out of the window in the Netherlands and see, and they do actually really linear. It's tragic at some point when you think of how awesome the models are and how much time has been. But this is sometimes much better, like really literally looking out the weather in the Netherlands, seeing where the clouds go, and then basically doing the prediction is often better nowadays because you have so much data. But yeah, this is a whole other discussion if we should turn to more machine learning things.
State, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's called now. It's chaotic. It's very often what's happening is you actually get pretty good approximations of the initial conditions, but since it's so chaotic, you can highly deviate from it. That's often the issue. So to make this a little bit shorter, what we're trying to do is, this is the prior ensemble. We're trying to get to the posterior ensemble. And to do that, we want to estimate a transport map. What you really do is you estimate, you have to solve this problem. We could have 4 talks on this alone. So I'm not going to even try to explain even further, but we could also discuss in more detail if you're interested. But all you need to know is, in theory, it would give you the perfect solution. But estimating those transport maps is super complicated and computationally intensive. And a lot of the filters go in this kind of directions. There are many cool advanced filters that somehow approximate the transport map. So if you look into the community, a lot of people do that. And they, of course, have many fancy tricks. Actually, also machine learning is used to do that somehow computationally feasibly. And here's just one one way to approximate it. So you basically discretize the problem and solve this this here. This is computationally not desirable at all, but like bear with me. In theory, if the ensemble members go to infinity, you get the true transport map, and we also just replies. But so in theory, it gets you where you want to be. And just quickly talking about the computational issues. So it doesn't scale well, and you obviously want your ensemble members to be large. And also, I mean, if the dimension of the state becomes huge, just evaluating this is also super costly. So I'm not even considering this in here, but this is actually also becoming part of the problem. What people then do is they do some kind of regularization. And one of them, they uses the synchronous regularization you can see here, which actually makes it much faster. And then also, sometimes it's numerically more stable for some reason, despite actually being an approximation. And I have it later on in the slides, but essentially, if you tune this lambda in the right way, so in one direction, you basically get back to the full-on transport problem estimation. The other direction is actually going back to the monomial example we had earlier. So these are the two extremes, essentially. And of course, what you can also do, and this is also sometimes done, so in 1D, the problem is actually fairly easy, but and why would you ever be in 1D? What is often done in data assimilation is that you do what's called localization, where you really consider the components of the state space basically individually, and then it makes the problem a little bit simpler. But yeah, this is a detail that we maybe don't need to talk about right now. But so let's talk about the problems. Of course, there are many problems apart from being computationally hard. So first of all, what happens is that you're really underestimating the spread. This is actually typically also a problem of ensemble Kalman filters. So you're always underestimating the spread. And what people do is they inflate or rejuvenate. That's the thing, because you know you kind of need to increase this. And actually also for the inverse problems, I guess that's what you need to do, and that's what you want to do is in this evolution step, you kind of want to increase the spread of the particles because you hope getting to a better direction, and you also know that you're underestimating. So yeah, what I just mentioned is you basically add noise to your ensemble members because you know you're underestimating, so you want to increase the spread. The issue with that is of course you don't know the direction to spread the noise in. If you knew that, that would obviously be exactly the problem you're trying to solve. But still, people look into this. How can we basically? It goes into the whole idea of having better proposal densities, essentially. This is, yeah, as I said, also done for ensemble Kalman filters. So with that in mind, because we know we're underestimating the spread, what we can think about, because we talked about this whole moment matching, what you could try is you would say, okay, do I actually match the first moments of the particle filter? And this is now, when I talk about the first moment of the particle filters, I always mean finite n, so finite number of particles. And now the question is, would it be possible also to match the second one? All the ensemble Kalman filters, because as the Gaussian approximations obviously don't estimate the first moment of the particle correctly, but all the latter ones that I propose to you actually do, just by design. And also all of those regularizations do. That I introduced. So we could use those, compute the filter from that regularization, and we could still do that. And now you're trying to say, okay, since we know we're underestimating the spread, how about we just again match the second moment of the particle filter? The other alternative would just be randomly increasing, and then you have another tuning thing that you need to figure out. So you can basically do the same thing as I proposed earlier with the NET app, which does that already. but doesn't actually solve this transport problem. How you exactly do this is another story, obviously numerically and so on. But essentially, this linear transformation you have, you correct it, and the way you correct it is that you kind of match the second moment. For that, you need to solve this Riccati equation, which you can do maybe some consideration to solve this. This is of course an approximation, but yeah. I want to get to some pictures for you to actually prove to you that it's working a little bit. So let's say we have this kind of situation going on. So we have the Gaussian pair, but a non-Gaussian likelihood. And now you can compare the different filters and see how they're doing in terms of matching the moments essentially, or getting the errors right. And you can see here which of the moments we're considering. And even though we're only correcting the first and the second moment, you immediately get better on the third and the fourth moment as well, which is kind of nice. So what this picture should tell you is basically, it seems to be working nicely, just by correcting the first two, or actually the second one. And again, you could also look at more general models. So our go-to toy model is the Lorentz 63, because although it's just 3 dimensions, it's already awful enough to kind of like be comparable to what's going on in numerical weather prediction. Somebody is writing to me?
Yeah, both computers.
Yeah, and also there, yeah, again, what this should tell you, basically what you see here, is that it really does seem to help to do this correction. And there are actually also some other fancy numerical tools I will not talk about, but there's other things you can actually do to improve. The one thing I want to get to, because,
Sorry, no.
Yeah.
My first question is the ensemble size in the slides?
Yeah, the M is the ensemble size, yeah. Just really quickly, because I've been advertising doing smoothing, if you have a model with memory, then you can also kind of improve on this smoothness by doing the smoother rather than filter. And now this is the point where I wanted to get to, which I've been kind of telling you about is, so I don't just need to, I can also split the likelihood for this hybrid idea, mix different filters, let's say the ones I've been kind of proposing. And this definitely also works in the inverse Kalman setup. And all I do then is, for example, this is the linear transformation I get from my a Gaussian approximate filter. And then this is the transformation I get from my more fancy particle filter approximation. And since I'm splitting again, I'm in theory getting to the true filter. I mean, obviously those have different approximations. So in that sense, we're not really getting to the true ensemble. But it's exactly what I wanted to do, is combine filters with different benefits and disadvantages. And yeah. I don't think I actually have a plot in this. I'm not sure if we ever looked at the one I showed you earlier for that particular hybrid. So I have for the Lorentz 63, you can see how it does. But yeah, I don't think we ever checked this actually. So this is because independent of the moments, this has actually nothing to do with the moments at this point. It's just you could do that with any filter. And yeah, this would be definitely also beneficial for classical. Actually, one thing that is curious about this, obviously the order might matter. And the order I'm actually showing you here wouldn't be the order I would propose to do, because that's the particle filter essentially, and that's the Gaussian approximation. What typically helps is to do the more stable thing first, and then do the particle filter, basically to do the fine tuning. So you can think of it as a proposal step with the Kalman filter, like ensemble Kalman filter. But of course, you can try both directions, but you immediately see actually that direction is not the good idea. You should do the other one. And what you see here is, so one side here is just the standard ensemble Kalman filter or spherical filter. And here, this is the particle filter. What you can see as soon as the ensemble number goes down, particle filter starts to really suck. And this is only 3 dimensions. So 15 particles is not great.
Sorry, we didn't count out.
Yeah, I think I called it better earlier.
Okay.
So, sorry, I have, yeah, but this is supposed to be better. I'm sorry. So this is just my whatever particle filter approximation, and this is just my ensemble Kalman filter. What you can see is that the in-between version is better. And if you get a lot of particles, at some point, this is becoming better. But if you're in this area where you actually don't have sufficiently many particles, like the M is not large enough, then it is actually often beneficial to be in the in-between area. And this is what we've experienced for all kinds of numerical examples. I'm just showing you here the 963, but this seems to be the case. And in fact, we have also looked at it for inverse problem. We looked at the Gaussian code here. So here are just the specifics of the example.
Just hold on a moment.
Yeah, sorry, that's the part. That's the part. Yeah, that might be more interesting to you.
So you've got the data is the
I have partial observations.
partial observations.
Yeah. Probability. So yeah, what you can see here is my estimated probability, and also in the corner you see the reference, and then my observation points. And now I have all kinds of combinations. So the beta here, it stands for the in-between, the hybrid basically version. And then I have also different combinations using synchrone or not. Obviously, you can now play around with all kinds of filters. You can do this endlessly. And it doesn't become as obvious here. What we notice is that it does actually matter for the different parameters. Because what is always the case, if something is actually fairly Gaussian, it's very hard to be the ensemble Kalman filter. Like, in fact, even when things are not that Gaussian, it's always hard to actually create a setup where the fancy cool filter can be Gaussian. But you can see even here in between the sum of
the problem with Gaussian spectrum, what was it time?
I would have to actually look it up, but yeah, it's a while ago.
It's not Gaussian.
I'm not. I think we tried both, but yeah, I would have to look it up. Actually, in the papers quite a while ago. Yeah, as you can see again, for some of the parameters, here's again this hybrid kind of thing going on. That it doesn't matter. For others, it doesn't at all. So the error grows. Especially if you have small sample sizes, here 100, you can see that going towards a particle filter is actually bad again. And then, yeah, for others, it seems to be working better, like here, here, and here. And yeah, this is essentially, I'm not going to get to the continuous filters, but this is really what I wanted to start with, because hopefully this is somehow of interest to you, that you could be potentially using this for your inverse problems, mixing these kind of filters, and getting the best of 2 worlds, essentially. And obviously, this whole thing involves a lot of tuning and fancy numerical magic, but in the end, it seems to be somehow beneficial. And we've been now looking into. So as I told you, I'm not in this project. I'm currently collaborating with people that actually have also tomography problems, and we're trying to look at that as well. But yeah, this is only new work. I'm not confident to talk about yet. But yeah, so hopefully there's something in it for you guys. Yeah, if you want to talk about any of the details, I've washed over Yeah, it's virtual.
So, yeah, we have been asking questions as you go along, so don't worry.
Yeah, also I will be around till actually on Friday. But I come back in May. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, you just have to don't realize that some
Yeah, I also do apologize for the hard limitation. Every time I talk about this, I think it should.
I think it's very brave to cross, you know, it's great that we've got overlap between the three programs. It's quite brave to step into giving a talk across. So, but as far as inverse problems, application of inverse problems, we have done inverse problems where we have a time domain. And, you know, I guess we have them in radar, certainly in them, using ensemble Kalman pointers is a thing that people do in inverse problems. So,
I guess also, I mean, often, as far as I understood, sometimes the parameters that are being estimated are not really stationary at all. And people just assume that to make things simple. So I guess there might be something to.
we have interrupted you very much.
No. I also, I think that maybe we need to digest all of this.
Absolutely, and it really helps you get slides and so.
Yeah.
Look at that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.